They missed Mother's Day, then demanded my savings, and I shopped them forever. By 11 o'clock, the table looked like a picture from a magazine. Marian Cole had taken her time with it. The linen cloth had been pressed 2 days earlier, folded carefully between towels so not a single crease would show. The plates were the good ones, the ones she never used unless she wanted to feel like life still had special occasions in it. The silverware had belonged to her mother-old, a little worn, but polished until it shone. She had even taken the cloth napkins from the drawer where they slept most of the year and ironed them late into the previous evening, her back aching, her hands clumsy with age and arthritis. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. Down the center of the table sat a small vase of supermarket flowers, the cheap kind, stems cut short and squeezed into a too small glass. They weren't much, but they were fresh yesterday, bright yellows and pinks. Marian had bought them with the last few dollars left after paying the electricity bill and stretching her pension check as far as it would go. She had smiled as she set them down, because Mother's Day deserved flowers, even if no one else thought so anymore. The chicken was already in the oven, filling the little house with the smell of rosemary and lemon. Potatoes waited in a pot, peeled and ready to be boiled and mashed with butter she had splurged on. The salad sat covered in the refrigerator, lettuce crisp, tomatoes sliced, the dressing in a jar on the shelf ready to be shaken. She had done her part. The rest depended on her children. The day before, she had gone through the same ritual she always did now, dialing numbers on her worn cell phone with a mix of hope and dread, forcing her voice to sound light. Her daughter, Janelle, had answered on the 4th ring, as usual sounding like she was doing 5 things at once. Marian could hear some kind of show playing in the background, something loud and brash, and the faint chatter of other voices. "Baby," Marian had said, "I'm making brunch tomorrow. It's Mother's Day. Are you coming?" Janelle's reply had been automatic. She was always quick with words, quick with charm. Of course she'd be there, she had said. Of course. She wouldn't miss it. She had sounded distracted, but the answer itself had been yes, and Marian had pressed that yes to her heart like a child clutching a toy. When she'd hung up, she had called her son, Darius. His voice was deeper now than the boy's voice she still heard in her memories, but there was the same impatience there, the same sense that someone else was waiting for him to finish. "Are you coming tomorrow?" Marian had asked. "I thought I'd cook. The 3 of us together. Like old times." He had sighed, but he had said he'd come. "Yeah, Ma, I'll swing by. Don't stress," he replied. He'd hung up quickly, but his answer had been yes too. 2 yes. 2 promises. That night, Marian had slept with a thin, trembling kind of happiness in her chest, afraid to touch it in case it broke. Now, at 11, the table waited, perfect and expectant. Marian shuffled to the front window and glanced outside. The street in front of her little house in Hartwood, South Carolina, was quiet. A few cars drove by. Across the street, a family climbed into their vehicle, children holding flowers and a wrapped box. Marian watched the little girl carefully hold a card in both hands, terrified of bending it. She smiled and went back to the kitchen. There was still time. Her children were adults. Adults ran late. That was all. At noon, she checked the time again. Noon was when she'd told them brunch would be ready. The chicken would be perfect by then, the potatoes done, the salad crisp. She walked to the window again, then back to the table, straightening a fork that didn't need straightening. Nothing. At 12:30, the little knot that lived in her stomach most days began to tighten. It was a familiar feeling, like a rope being pulled gently but steadily from inside. She tried to swallow it down, telling herself that traffic was bad, that maybe they'd stopped for coffee, that her children were busy people with busy lives. At 1 o'clock, the timer on the oven beeped. Marian took the chicken out and set it on the stove. The scent was rich, warm, filling every room of the house. She put the potatoes on the burner, turned the knob, and listened to the gas catch with a soft whoosh. She set the table completely now, plates, silverware, glasses, napkins folded into simple rectangles. 2 places across from her chair. One for Janelle, one for Darius. She stood back and nodded as if someone else had made it all. Then she sat down and waited. The clock ticked. 1:15. 1:30. 1:45. At 2 o'clock, she finally picked up her phone. She called Janelle first. The phone rang and then slid into voicemail. Marian listened to her daughter's recorded voice, bright and professional, telling callers to leave a message. Marian hung up without speaking. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe Janelle had turned her phone down. Maybe she was driving. She called Darius. His phone went straight to voicemail, the automated voice cold and impersonal. The knot in her stomach twisted tighter. She tried again. Once more to Janelle. Once more to Darius. Nothing. The chicken cooled on the stove, the juices congealing in the pan. The potatoes boiled over slightly, little bubbles of starchy water dribbling down the sides of the pot. Marian turned the heat off and stared at the steam that rose, then faded. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the day was bright. She watched another family walk by, a boy holding a balloon, an older woman walking between two younger ones, their arms linked with hers. There were flowers there too. A gift bag. Laughter. Someone's mother was being celebrated. Marian turned away and went back to her chair. She sat there, hands folded in her lap, the sound of the clock louder than it had any right to be. It ticked through 3 o'clock. 4. 5. The light in the room turned golden, then began to fade, shadows lengthening across the carpet and up the walls, stretching like long fingers. She did not cry at first. She simply watched the table and the two empty chairs and listened to the wind outside and the hum of the refrigerator. She tried to tell herself stories, like she used to do for her children when they were small. Perhaps Janelle had had to work late. Perhaps Darius had had car trouble. Perhaps. But beneath all the perhaps, something colder had settled into her chest. Something that sounded like, of course. Of course this is how it is. At 6 o'clock, Marian stood on stiff legs and cleared the table no one had used. She moved slowly, stacking plates that had never held food, folding napkins no one had touched. She put the chicken into containers, slid the potatoes into another, and covered the salad. The refrigerator accepted it all without comment, humming on. She stared at the flowers in the center of the table. They were already starting to sag, petals bowing their heads as if ashamed. Marian took the vase to the sink and poured the water out. Some petals fell, clinging to the glass. She plucked them away and dropped them into the trash. The house smelled of roasted herbs and lemon. Marian turned out the kitchen light and went into the living room. She sat on the sofa and didn't bother with the lamp. There was enough leftover light coming in through the window to see the outlines of things, and soon there would be nothing to see anyway. Just darkness. The tears came slowly at first, then with the steady persistence of rain. They weren't loud. There were no dramatic sobs, no racking breaths. Just a quiet, relentless flow of salt water from eyes that had seen too much and hoped too long. She cried for Mother's Day before, when they had promised not to come. She cried for the birthdays she had spent alone, the holidays where she had cooked too much food and packed it into containers for days afterward. She cried for the woman she had once been, younger and full of belief that sacrifice meant something, that love, if poured out generously enough, would one day return. 70 years of life. Almost 50 of them are somebody's mother. As she sat in the dim room with her hands pressed to her face, she realized she was no longer sure what any of it had been for. Her phone lay on the coffee table, screen dark. She thought about picking it up again, about calling, about sending a message, about writing something simple like, "Where are you?" But she knew what would come back. The familiar phrases, worn out from use. Things got busy. Time slipped away. Next time, Mama. Promise. Next time had become a kind of ghost in her life, always promised, never arriving. By the time the sound of a car pulling up outside broke the silence, the room was completely dark. Marian didn't move. Her tear-swollen eyes burned, but she did not wipe them. The engine cut, doors slammed, familiar voices floated through the thin walls. The front door opened, light from the porch spilling into the living room as a hand flipped the switch by habit. Her children stood there, framed in brightness, smelling of perfume and cologne and the faint, sour note of alcohol. Their clothes were sharp, new fabrics catching the light. Their energy sparked, fizzy and restless, as if they had just come from somewhere loud and important and fun. "Thought we'd drop by," Janelle said, smiling as she stepped inside. Darius hovered behind her, grin already forming, words ready. Marian looked at them without speaking. For the first time in a long time, she saw them clearly. They were not the children who used to throw themselves at her legs after school, their cheeks sticky, their hands full of crumpled drawings. They were not the teenagers who slammed doors and rolled their eyes and thought the world owed them something but still occasionally fell asleep with their heads in her lap. They were grown now, polished on the outside, hollow where she wanted softness to be. And what they wanted tonight, she realized with a clarity that made her stomach turn, had nothing to do with her. While they talked about how busy they'd been, about how wild the party was, about how tired they were, her mind went somewhere else. It went to the envelope hidden in her bedside table, thick paper around a thin rectangle of card. A bus ticket. One way. A name of a town she'd never seen in person but had stared at on a screen until the letters blurred. The decision that ticket represented had been forming slowly in her, like a bruise blooming under the skin. She had thought she would wait. She had thought she would need more time to be sure. Sitting there in the light from the ceiling fixture, her eyes burning, the smell of cold chicken lingering in the air as her children began to talk about bills and overdue notices and needing a little help again, Marian understood something very simple. Whatever she was going to do, she could not do it halfway. She could not keep one hand held out to them and the other clutched around her own survival. Something inside her, something that had been stretched and patched and mended for decades, gave way with a quiet finality. The night after Mother's Day did not bring sleep. Marian lay in bed listening to the familiar creaks of the house, the sigh of the wind around the eaves, the occasional distant bark of a neighbor's dog. Beside her on the nightstand, the lamp cast a small circle of light onto the drawer where the ticket waited. Her mind replayed the scene from hours earlier. Janelle and Darius, smelling of celebration, laughter still buzzing in their voices, had shifted easily from shallow excuses to urgent requests. Late fees. Rent due. Credit card bills. It all rolled out as if they had rehearsed it, as if they were reading from a script they both knew by heart. They had not noticed the untouched plates stacked by the sink. They had not asked why the air smelled like a meal no one had eaten. They had not glanced at the table still set in the dining room, the chairs pushed in neatly around it. They had seen only the woman they always saw, a small, aging figure whose life, as far as they were concerned, revolved entirely around how much she could give. There had been a time, Marian knew, when she would have opened the old coffee tin she kept in the cabinet above the stove, the one that rattled faintly with folded bills and coins set aside from her pension. She would have pulled out what she had, maybe added a little more with a trip to the ATM, and pressed the money into their hands. She would have insisted it was fine, even as she calculated which medication she could afford to skip this month. But the loyal dog of her generosity had been beaten once too often. It did not come when they called this time. She had told them no. The word had surprised even her with how solid it felt in her mouth. Her children had reacted with disbelief, then frustration, then thinly veiled anger. Their faces had shifted, the charm sliding away to show something sharper underneath. After they left, after their car's taillights vanished down the street, Marian had sat very still in the dark. The house felt enormous and empty and entirely hers. For the first time, she wondered what it would be like to keep it that way. Now, lying in bed, sleep refusing to come, she reached for the drawer and pulled it open. Inside were envelopes, old letters, and tickets. She lifted the slip of card marked with a date 2 months away and the destination printed in bold, Harbor's Reach. The name alone sounded like an exhale after holding one's breath too long. She had bought that ticket weeks earlier, on a day when the loneliness had felt like a physical weight pressing on her chest. It had been an impulsive act, and yet not impulsive at all, the culmination of countless small disappointments, each one another pebble in the pocket of her hope, dragging it down. Tonight, the ticket no longer felt like a fantasy. It felt like a plan. Before she could step onto that bus, though, she needed something she had been denying herself for years: the truth. In the morning, Marian shuffled into the kitchen, made herself coffee, and sat at the tiny table with a pen and an old spiral notebook. The covers were worn, the pages yellowed. She had bought it years ago to write down recipes and then abandoned the idea after a few half-scribbled ingredients. She turned to a fresh page and wrote, in shaky but determined letters, "What I have given." She started with the most recent years, because those were the ones she could reconstruct from memory. $200 for Janelle's rent that one winter. $300 for Darius's car repairs. $100 for groceries, until payday. $50 here, $100 there. She paused to open drawers and retrieve folded receipts, deposit slips from the bank, notes she had scribbled on envelopes and never thrown away. The numbers grew, a slow accretion of small rescues. As the morning light shifted across the table and the coffee cooled in her mug, the tally in the margin crept higher. Marian's hand was cramped, but she kept writing, flipping pages, cross-checking dates with entries in an old wall calendar she had never thrown out. She had the habit of jotting down appointments and helped Jay with bills, or loaned to Dee on the days it happened. Now those faint pencil marks felt like messages from her past self, finally being read. When she reached the end of 5 years, she added the final column carefully. The total made her breath catch. She had given away more than $20,000 in that time. $20,000 on a pension that barely covered her own needs. $20,000 that she had scraped out of grocery money and skipped medications and winter heat turned down one more notch. Her children's problems, she realized, were not sudden storms whipping their lives into chaos. They were steady leaks in a boat they refused to patch, preferring instead to bail with her hands. The realization left her cold. She pushed the notebook away and stared at the counter. The slow drip of the faucet into the sink sounded suddenly louder, a steady tick-tick-tick, as if time were reminding her it would not wait forever. She needed to see the other side of the ledger. With a grim determination that felt strange and new, Marian retrieved her phone from the counter. She rarely used it for anything more than calls and the occasional photo of a flower in her yard. But last year, Janelle had sat at this very table and shown her how to look at socials, chuckling at her mother's confusion but patiently walking her through where to tap, how to type names. "You can see what everyone's up to," she'd said. "It's fun." Marian had not found it particularly fun at the time. Today it felt like a key. Her fingers were clumsy but careful as she opened the app and typed her daughter's name. Janelle's smiling face filled the small screen, framed by carefully curled hair and perfect makeup. A bar at the bottom declared that hundreds of people followed her. Marian tapped on the images. There was Janelle at a rooftop bar, a drink in hand, city lights stretching behind her. There she was in a new dress, tag still visible on the caption, some brand whose prices Marian could only guess at. There she was on a beach, lying on a lounge chair under an umbrella, a bright cocktail in hand, the sand impossibly white. The dates told their own story. The beach trip had been 2 weeks after she had sworn she couldn't make rent. The rooftop bar post was from 3 days after the last emergency phone call. Marian's eyes moved over each image as if they belonged to someone else's life. Restaurants with menus she knew charged more for a single steak than she spent on groceries for a week. Concerts. Weekend getaways. Fancy nail salons. Her thumb trembled as she scrolled. With each swipe, the gap between the story her daughter told her and the one she showed the world widened. She set the phone down for a moment, steadying herself with slow breaths. Then she searched for Darius. His page was less carefully arranged, less polished, but the themes were the same. New sneakers lined up in a row, each pair more expensive than the last. Motorcycle shots, some taken at what looked like a dealership, the chrome gleaming. Photos with friends at sports games, tickets held up for the camera. Barbecues. Tailgates. Late nights out. He looked happy in all of them. Relaxed. There was no sign of someone teetering on the edge of financial ruin. Only the life of a man who knew that somewhere, there was a soft place he could land if he fell. Her soft place. Marian felt a strange detachment settle over her, as if she were looking at her own life from the outside for the first time. This was not a sudden betrayal. This was a pattern, old and deep. She was about to close the app when a notification popped up at the top of the screen. A screenshot Janelle had shared to her story by mistake and then quickly deleted. Marian, who did not know how to find such things on her own, saw it only because it remained open on that little banner until she tapped it. The image was of a chat conversation between two people. The title at the top said, Cole Kids, a private group with only Janelle and Darius. The screenshot captured a brief exchange. The words were small, but they might as well have been written in fire. Have you hit up the old lady yet? Darius had typed. Not yet, Janelle had replied. I know how to get her though. I'll tell her it's serious. You know how she is. She always caves. Yeah, Darius had answered. Poor thing. But hey, that's what she's there for, right? We'll take care of her when she's ancient. For now she can bankroll us a bit longer. The app offered options at the bottom. Reply, react, share. Marian pressed none of them. She simply stared until the letters blurred and her own reflection stared back at her from the darkening screen. Old lady. Bankroll. Poor thing. She locked the phone with a shaky thumb and set it down as if it might explode. For a long time she sat at the table, motionless. The house was so quiet that she could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tap of branches against the window. Her heart was beating, but her chest felt strangely empty, as if something essential had quietly stepped out and closed the door behind it. She thought of the nights she had stayed up late ironing uniforms, washing clothes, making sure there were lunches ready in the morning. She thought of the winter her hands had cracked and bled from cleaning houses in other people's neighborhoods, bringing home just enough money to keep the lights on. She thought of Marcus, her husband, coming home from his construction job with cement dust in his hair and saying, We're doing okay, Mare. We're getting them through. And she thought of a group chat where she had been reduced to a caricature of the hapless, soft-hearted fool whose only function was to open her wallet. The anger came slowly, not like a flame but like the tide, creeping in, filling spaces that had long been occupied by guilt and excuses. It was not rage at her children as much as it was rage at the years she had allowed herself to be used because she had believed that was what love required. She reached for the phone again, not to call, but to dial another number, one she rarely used. Rosa. Rosa Washington had lived 3 houses down from Marian for 20 years. She was the kind of neighbor who still knocked on doors with casseroles when someone died, who still sat on porches in summer with a glass of iced tea and news about everyone on the block. When Rosa's husband had passed a decade earlier, Marian had been the one to bring meals and sit with her in the long, quiet evenings that followed. Rosa picked up on the second ring, her voice warm and steady. Well, look who remembered my number. I need to talk to you, Marian said, surprised at how steady her own voice sounded. About something important. Say no more, Rosa replied. I'm coming over. Half an hour later, they sat at the same kitchen table where Marian's notebook and phone still lay. Marian told her everything of the missed Mother's Day, the years of financial support, the photos, the screenshot. Rosa listened without interrupting, her eyes growing darker with each detail. When Marian finished, wiping her face with a napkin she hadn't realized she'd grabbed, Rosa reached across the table and took her hand. This has to stop, she said softly. You can't keep letting them do this to you. I know, Marian whispered. I just don't know how to not be their mother. Rosa squeezed her fingers. You won't stop being their mother. You stop being their doormat. The bluntness made Marian huff out a laugh that was half sob. Rosa leaned back and folded her arms, her mind already moving. You said you bought a ticket, she said. Some seaside place? Harbor's Reach, Marian replied. The name sounded fragile spoken aloud. Rosa nodded slowly. All right. Then we build you a bridge from here to there. Properly. No holes. No way for them to drag you back. And before you go, you tell them exactly what you want them to know. Not for their sake. For yours. The next days blurred into a flurry of practical tasks Marian would never have believed she could handle 6 months earlier. Rosa connected her with her nephew, a lawyer named Aaron who worked downtown. He agreed to meet with Marian as a favor, his usual rates muted by familial affection and Rosa's insistence. In Aaron's office, surrounded by shelves of thick books, Marian felt out of place, her worn cardigan and sensible shoes at odds with the sleek furniture. But Aaron was kind, his questions clear and patient. He listened as Marian laid out her situation, showing him her notebook, the screenshot, the rough tally of money given. "You are under no obligation to keep supporting them," he said when she finished. "They're adults. Legally, financially, emotionally. Your duty is to yourself now." Those words felt almost absurd in her ears. Duty to herself. No one had ever framed her life that way. Aaron explained wills and beneficiaries, durable powers of attorney, how to change the recipient on her pension accounts, how to open a new bank account that her children did not know existed. He talked about elder financial abuse in calm, neutral terms that made Marian's stomach churn but also made her feel less alone. "This is very common," he said. "Adulthood does not automatically make people responsible. Sometimes it just makes them more creative in how they lean on others." At the end of the meeting, he quoted her a fee. It was more than she had ever paid for anything that wasn't a car or a funeral. But before she could falter, Rosa, who had insisted on coming along, spoke up. "I'll cover it," she said. "Or we can work something out. You're not backing down now over money, not after what they've cost you." Marian protested, but Rosa shushed her, and in the end, Marian agreed to let the cost be another line on a new ledger, a one titled, "What Others Have Given Me," a page that until now had been nearly empty. Over the next weeks, Marian made appointments at 2 different banks. At one, she quietly opened a new account, arranging for most of her pension to be deposited there each month. At the other, she left only enough to cover the few automatic payments she hadn't yet redirected. She let the old account look as thin and fragile as she often felt. She began to sell things. Not the precious few objects that carried Marcus's memory, but the extra furniture, the unused dishes, the clothes she knew she would never wear again. She learned, with Rosa's help, how to list items online. People showed up at her door with cash and left with pieces of her old life carried under their arms. Each small transaction added weight to the new account. Each object leaving the house made the rooms feel lighter, less crowded with expectations. In quiet moments between errands and signatures, she took to walking past the places her children frequented. She stood across the street from the auto shop where Darius worked and saw him emerge on a Friday afternoon, laughing with a young woman whose hand slipped easily into his. They climbed into a shiny silver car Marian had never seen before, the kind of car whose monthly payments must have been a small fortune. They drove to a restaurant with sleek glass windows and linen-draped tables, the sort of place she sometimes glimpsed on television shows set in worlds far from hers. She watched them sit where she could see them through the window, watched the waiter set down a bottle of wine, and watched Darius order without looking at the prices. This was the son who had stood in her living room wringing his hands about bills he could not pay. The next day, she saw Janelle on her lunch break, ducking into a boutique whose mannequins wore clothes that cost more than Marian's monthly grocery budget. She listened from behind a rack of sale items as her daughter chirped to her friends about finally being free of all that debt. Marian heard her say that now she could focus on treating herself. Treating herself. Marian went home that evening and added another page to her notebook. This one she titled simply, "Lies." Each new entry did not make her angrier so much as it made her calmer. The illusion that had governed her choices for decades was dissolving. In its place was something rough-edged but solid, a sense that she was owed more than the crumbs of her own life. With Aaron's help, she drafted a new will. It named new beneficiaries. It named Rosa as someone empowered to make decisions if Marian became unable to. It removed Janelle and Darius as the default inheritors of everything she owned. It included, at Aaron's suggestion, a letter of explanation to accompany the legal language, written in Marian's own words. She wrote it slowly over several days, hands shaking, rewriting sentences until the story felt true and clear. It was not a screed, not a howl of accusation. It was a record of sacrifices made, kindnesses offered, patterns ignored for too long. As she wrote, she felt herself stepping slightly aside from her role as mama and into the role of narrator of her own life. When the legal documents were finally signed and sealed, Aaron slid the copies across the desk to her. "You've put things in order," he said. "Whatever you choose to do now, you're protected." Protected. Marian had never thought to use that word about herself. She had protected others. She had taken pride in it, even as it wore her down. Now, for the first time, there were barriers between herself and those who had mistaken her love for an endless resource. The bridge to Harbor's Reach was no longer just a ticket in a drawer. It was paperwork in a neat folder, numbers in an account, the absence of certain names on certain lines. There was one thing left to build, an ending. Not for their benefit. For hers. She wanted to leave without ghosts. She wanted to know that she had spoken her truth, even if no one wanted to hear it. So she circled a date on her calendar 3 weeks from then and wrote 2 words on it in bold, dark ink. Final dinner. The day of the dinner dawned clear and mild, the kind of spring Saturday that made the whole neighborhood smell faintly of cut grass and grills warming up for the evening. Marian rose before the sun was high, her body used to early mornings from a lifetime of work. She stripped the bed and remade it with clean sheets, smoothing the corners with an absent, practiced hand. She dusted surfaces that would soon belong to someone else, wiped down countertops that her own children had long ago stopped noticing. Then she turned her attention to the kitchen. She had invited Janelle and Darius in much the same way she had invited them for Mother's Day, her voice calm on the phone, her words carefully chosen. "Let's have dinner," she had said. "Just the 3 of us. There's something important I need to talk to you about." Both had gone quiet at that. Each, in their own way, had asked if she was ill. She had allowed a small pause before she answered, just long enough to let the possibility bloom and wither in their minds. "I'm not dying," she had told them. "Not yet. Just come. It matters to me." They had agreed. Of course they had. Something important and matters had translated in their heads to money, and inheritance, and time to make sure we're in the will. Marian knew them well enough to picture the way their eyes must have lit up, the way their friends might have heard. "My mama's finally going to talk about the house." She let them believe whatever they wanted. Truth would arrive on its own schedule. Now, in the quiet of her kitchen, Marian seasoned chicken and peeled potatoes with a steady, almost meditative motion. She made the dishes they had loved as children, even though they hadn't cared much about her cooking in years. Baked chicken, mashed potatoes with too much butter, green beans cooked with onion until they were soft and savory. Cornbread, because Marcus had always said no table was complete without it. A chocolate cake that came from a box but still filled the house with the smell of sweetness and cocoa. She set the table one last time with the good plates. Not to impress them. To honor herself. By 6:30, everything was ready. The house was cleaner than it had been in months. Boxes stacked neatly in corners ready for the charity pickup, surfaces bare where framed photographs used to stand. Marian had chosen her clothing carefully, a simple navy dress that flattered her still slim frame, her silver hair brushed back and pinned, and a small pair of earrings Marcus had given her long ago. When the doorbell rang at 7 on the dot, she was already standing in the hallway. They arrived together, as she had expected. Darius's car gleamed at the curb, its fresh wax flashing under the streetlights. Janelle stepped through the door first, perfume preceding her, her lipstick a shade Marian had never seen before. "You look nice, Mama," Janelle said, eyes sliding over the room, taking inventory. "So do you," Marian replied. Darius hugged her briefly, his arms firm but his attention already shifting past her. "Smells good in here," he said. "What's the occasion?" "You'll see," Marian said, gesturing toward the living room. "Sit for a bit. We'll eat soon." They settled on the sofa and armchair, commenting on traffic, on a coworker, on some show they were watching. Marian listened and nodded and let their words wash over her. They did not ask about the boxes. They did not notice that some of the decorations on the walls were missing, leaving faint squares in the paint. After a glass of cheap wine she had bought especially for this night, she was not opening the better bottle she had been saving for herself. She ushered them to the dining room. For a moment, as they sat and she took her place at the head of the table, she felt a flicker of an old sensation: family. It had been years since they had all eaten together like this. The image almost fooled her. They ate. They made small talk. They praised the food in generic, distracted ways, their eyes darting toward the folder that lay on the sideboard, the one Marian had placed there deliberately. Janelle's gaze lingered on it more than once, curiosity sharpening her features. When the plates were cleaned and the cake mostly gone, Marian cleared her throat. "I have some things to share," she said. "I'd appreciate it if you just listened until I've finished." Something in her tone made both of them fall silent. Darius leaned back, arms crossed. Janelle folded her napkin carefully and set it down, fingers suddenly still. Marian stood and retrieved the folder. She set it in the middle of the table and opened it, spreading out a neat stack of papers, printed screenshots, photocopied receipts, pages from her notebook rewritten in clearer ink. "This is my life," she said quietly. "Our life. In numbers and pictures and words. I thought you should see it before we say goodbye." "Goodbye," Janelle echoed sharply. "Mama, what are you talking about?" Marian ignored the interruption. She slid the first sheet across the table, a list of dates and amounts. "For the last 5 years," she said, "I have written down every time I helped you with money. Every loan. Every emergency. Every bill I covered. I want you to look at the total." Darius glanced at the page and then did a double take, leaning forward. Janelle's eyes skimmed down and widened. "That can't be right," she said. 20,000. "There's no way." "I checked it twice," Marian replied. "With my lawyer. With my bank statements. It's right. It's actually a little low, because there are times I didn't write down. I handed you cash before you went out the door." "Mama," Darius began, "you know we always meant to pay you back." "It's just..." "Stop." Marian's voice cut across his like a blade. It surprised them both. It surprised her. "Don't lie to me. Not tonight. We're past that." She picked up the next few pages and spread them out. Screenshots of social media posts, dates circled, captions highlighted. Janelle's rooftop pictures. Darius's new motorcycle. Dinner after dinner after dinner out. "I see you," Marian said. "The world sees you. You've shown them your lives. Trips. Parties. New toys. Wonderful. I'm glad you've enjoyed yourselves. But when you stood in my doorway telling me you couldn't pay your bills, when you said you were choosing between rent and food, this is what you were doing instead." "That's not fair," Janelle protested, color rising in her cheeks. "Everyone posts the good stuff online. You don't know what was going on behind the scenes." Marian slid the last printed page forward, the screenshot of the chat. "I know what was going on behind the scenes," she said. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I know you have a private group where you talk about me like I'm a bank with legs. I know you call me the old lady. I know you joke about milking me for money a little longer before you have to take care of me when I'm ancient." The words hung in the air, heavier now that they were spoken aloud in this room where so many bedtime stories and whispered confidences had once floated. Darius's face was drained of color. Janelle reached for the page with shaking fingers. That was just us messing around," Darius said, his voice defensive and thin. "You weren't supposed to see that. It doesn't mean anything." "It means enough," Marian replied. "It means you don't see me. Not really. You see what I can do for you. You see what I can give. You don't see the woman who skipped her blood pressure pills so she could send you $300. The woman who sat in the dark last winter to keep the electric bill low so you could buy a plane ticket for that trip you said was work but was really a vacation. There it was, laid bare on the table. Not just the numbers but the pattern, repeated so often it had become invisible until she dragged it into the light. "This is ridiculous," Darius muttered. "You're blowing things out of proportion. Everybody jokes about their parents. Everybody takes help when they need it. Isn't that what parents are for? Parents are for raising children, not funding grown adults who buy designer sneakers while claiming they can't buy groceries," Marian said. "Parents are for love. Love is not supposed to look like this." Janelle wiped her eyes. "We've made mistakes," she said. "We know we messed up, okay? But why are you saying goodbye? Why are you acting like this is the end?" Marian inhaled slowly. "The next part would not be easy. But it was necessary. Because I'm leaving," she said simply. "Because this chapter is over. Because I spent years telling myself you'd change, that you'd grow up, that one day you'd look at me and see more than a pocket with money in it. And I can't wait for that day anymore. I don't have time to keep waiting." She pulled out a smaller stack of papers, these with official seals and neatly typed paragraphs. "I met with a lawyer," she said. "I changed my will. I changed my accounts. I sold this house." Both of them spoke at once. "You sold the house?" Darius demanded. "To who?" Janelle gasped. "You can't do that without telling us." "Oh, I can," Marian said. "And I did. This house is in my name. It always has been. Your father and I paid for it. I kept it after he died. You contributed nothing to it but memories, some of them sweet, many of them bitter. I have every right to sell it, and I have. The sale closes in a week. After that, it belongs to someone else." Janelle stared at her, mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Darius pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. "So what?" he said. "You're just going to run off somewhere with the money? Leave us with nothing? We're your kids." "You are my children," Marian agreed. "Nothing can change that. But being my children does not entitle you to my life. Or my savings. Or this house. Those are gifts, not guarantees. You've spent years acting like they are your right." They stared at her as if seeing a stranger. In a way they were. The Marian who would have bent, who would have softened, who would have rushed to reassure and soothe and find some compromise. That woman had evaporated slowly over years of tears in dark rooms. Tonight, only the outline of someone else remained. She slid 2 plain envelopes across the table, each with a name written in her careful script. "These are for you," she said. "They contain some things I thought you might want. Little pieces of your father. Photographs. His old letters. I won't take those with me. They belong to the parts of his life that included you." Janelle picked up her envelope as if it might bite her. Darius left his where it lay. "That's it," Janelle whispered. "That's all we get." "That's all you're owed," Marian replied. "Anything else I had to give, I gave already. I gave you childhoods where you never went to bed hungry even when I did. I gave you clean clothes, school supplies, rent money, rides, advice. I gave you chances. So many chances. And when I needed the smallest thing in return your presence, your time, a phone call that wasn't about money you were busy." "I came when you were sick," Darius said weakly. "You came for 10 minutes, smelling like you were late for a party, and left with $50 I did not have to spare," Marian replied. "Do you remember what the doctor said about my blood pressure? Do you remember me calling to tell you I was scared?" Neither of them answered. "I'm not saying this to punish you," she went on. "I'm saying it because I refuse to leave this life without at least once saying out loud what happened. I was not just forgetful, or soft, or foolish. I was kind. I was generous. I was lied to. And I am choosing not to be lied to anymore. What do you want us to do?" Janelle asked. Her tears had slowed. The first shock had faded into something flatter, an exhausted incredulity. Say we're sorry? We can do that. We are sorry. We didn't mean to hurt you. I believe you didn't set out to hurt me, Marian said. I also believe you liked what my hurt brought you. Silence settled over the table like dust. I have a bus ticket, Marian said, her voice softening slightly as she turned toward the future. To a town by the ocean. Harbor's Reach. I've always wanted to see the sea. I never had the time or the money because I was busy making sure other people were okay. Now I'm going to make sure I'm okay. I'm going to spend whatever time I have left watching waves instead of looking at my phone for your messages. You're being dramatic, Darius said, but the words lacked conviction. Marian stood. Her knees ached, her back protested. But inside, she felt strangely light. This isn't a performance, she said. It's an exit. She carried the empty plates into the kitchen, giving them a moment to process. When she returned, both of them were still sitting there, staring at nothing as if the room had shifted around them. I'd like you to go now, she said quietly. I've said what I needed to say. This is crazy, Darius muttered, standing abruptly. You'll calm down in a few days. We'll talk then. No, Marian said. We won't. I'm done talking in circles. I wish you well. Truly, I do. I hope you figure out how to stand on your own 2 feet. But I will not be the floor you stand on anymore. Janelle rose more slowly. She clutched the envelope to her chest like a lifeline. Mama, she whispered. You can't just erase us. I'm not erasing you, Marian said. I'm releasing myself. She walked to the front door and opened it. The night air was cool against her face. They hesitated, then moved past her and onto the porch. Before they stepped off it, Janelle turned back. If you change your mind, she said. If you need anything. I won't, Marian replied. Darius muttered something under his breath Marian chose not to catch. They walked to the car. Darius slammed the door hard enough to make Marian's mailbox rattle. The engine roared to life, then the vehicle reversed, headlights cutting across the front of the house one last time. As the car disappeared down the street, Marian closed the door gently and leaned her back against it. For a moment she waited for the expected wave of regret, of doubt, of the old instinct to fix what was broken whether or not she had broken it. Instead, what came was a quiet, profound relief. The house was empty, but it was not emptier than it had been when they were here. In some strange way, it felt fuller now of her. She returned to the dining room and began to clear the table, stacking plates, folding napkins, covering the leftover food. With each movement, she felt something unhook inside her. Expectations. Habits. Narratives she had carried so long they had become like extra bones in her body. That night, when she lay down in bed, she slept deeply for the first time in years, the bus ticket a cool, solid promise in the drawer by her hand. The weeks after the last dinner moved quickly, each day pulling Marian further from the life she had known and closer to the one she had only dared to imagine. The house began to empty. Furniture went out the door piece by piece. Marian's dining table, host to countless meals and several lonely feasts, went to the young family 2 streets over whose own table had been broken in a move. The sofa found a new home with the single mother on the corner who had always waved from her porch. Marian gave her the television too, surprising herself with how little it mattered to her now that she would not be sitting in front of it waiting for calls that never came. She gave away more than she sold, and in the giving she felt a strange kind of abundance. These were things that had held memories, but not all memories needed to be carried forward. Some could stay where they were created. Legally, things were in motion. The house sale progressed with an efficiency that startled her. The buyer was eager. The market was favorable. Papers were signed, inspections done, minor repairs negotiated. The lawyer called with updates. Erin checked in to make sure all the funds would land in the right account at the right time. When Marian held the bank receipt showing the deposit from the sale, a 6-figure number that made her eyes sting, she felt both astonishment and a faint, sharp ache. This was what her life in that house had translated into on paper. All the years, all the work, all the repairs, all the holiday decorations, all the tears shed in its rooms. A tidy sum she could now choose to use on herself. You could do a lot with that, Rosa said, peering at the paper over Marian's shoulder. Or you could just sit on a porch by the water and breathe. Either way, it's yours. Marian nodded. For the first time, it really feels that way. Janelle came by once, unannounced, 3 weeks after the dinner. Marian was sorting through old boxes in the bedroom when she heard the knock. For a moment her stomach clenched, the old reflex kicking in, but then she inhaled slowly and walked to the door. Janelle stood on the porch, her face bare of makeup for once, dark circles under her eyes. She looked past Marian instantly, taking in the bareness of the living room. "You really did it," she said, stepping inside without waiting to be asked. "You're really getting rid of everything." "I'm getting rid of what I don't need," Marian replied. Janelle's gaze landed on the blank spot where the sofa used to be. "That couch was part of our family," she said. "You could have at least asked us if we wanted it." "You didn't want the couch," Marian said gently. "You wanted the idea that there would always be a place waiting for you, furnished, paid for, maintained by someone else. I am not a storage unit for your past." Janelle flinched, then straightened, bristling. "I came to apologize," she said. "To try to fix things." Marian studied her daughter's face. There was genuine distress there, but underneath it she saw calculation, fear, the dawning understanding that the safety net she had assumed would always be there was being rolled up. "I'm listening," Marian said. "I shouldn't have said those things," Janelle began. "In the chat. That was ugly. I didn't think you'd ever see it. But I was angry and stressed and—" "You were comfortable," Marian interjected. "Comfortable enough to make jokes about the person who kept bailing you out." Janelle smoothed her hair, a nervous habit she had had since she was little. "We can change," she said. "I can change. I'll come visit more. I'll take you out sometimes. We can do brunch properly. Just please, don't leave like this. Don't cut us off. We're your family." "You're my children," Marian said. "Being family is something else. It involves mutual care, mutual respect. For years, the only direction that flowed was from me to you." "People can grow," Janelle insisted. "You always told us that. You said no one was beyond hope." "I believe that," Marian said. "I still do. I hope you grow. I hope one day you look back on this and realize what you did, and that you decide to be different with other people in your life. Maybe with your own children. But my role in your growth is over." Janelle's eyes filled with tears. "You sold the house," she said again, as if repeating the fact could change it. "You bought a ticket to some random town. It's reckless. What if something happens to you? What if you get sick? Who will help you then?" Marian smiled, a small, tired curve of her lips. "I'll hire help if I can afford it. I'll rely on friends. I'll rely on myself. What I won't do is rely on people who only show up when there's something to gain." "I can't believe you're choosing strangers over your own blood," Janelle said, voice breaking. "I'm choosing myself over your expectations," Marian replied. "It only feels like a betrayal to you because until now, I've always chosen you." The conversation wound in circles for a while. Janelle apologized again. She begged. She threatened lightly, with words like regret and lonely. Marian listened, but something in her had shifted so profoundly that the guilt couldn't find purchase. At last, she walked her daughter to the door. "I hope you find peace," she said. "I really do. But you won't find it by treating me as your backup plan. You'll have to build it yourself. If you change your mind," Janelle said, gripping the doorframe, "call me." "I won't," Marian replied. After she left, Marian felt sad. Of course she did. A lifetime of instinct does not vanish because you declared it so at one dinner. But she also felt oddly detached, as if watching something come gently to rest that had been rattling for years. Darius did not come by. He sent one terse text. "Hear you're selling the place. Hope you know what you're doing." And when Marian did not reply, he sent another, longer message about rights and fairness and what Dad would have wanted. Marian read it once, then deleted it and blocked his number. It hurt, but no more than the 100 smaller hurts that had preceded it. On the last night in the house, Marian slept on a borrowed air mattress. The rooms echoed around her, every sound amplified by the walls that no longer had furniture to swallow noise. She walked from room to room, touching door frames, running her fingers over the faint lines on the kitchen wall where she had once marked her children's growth. She did not cry. She had done enough of that here. Instead, she whispered a quiet goodbye to the girl she had been when she moved in with Marcus, full of plans. To the young mother who had rocked colicky babies in the middle of the night. To the widow who had learned how to live with half of her heart missing. To the older woman who had sat at the table tallying her sacrifices, finally seeing them clearly. At dawn, she handed the keys to the realtor in the driveway. The woman smiled, congratulated her on the sale, and promised to send final paperwork. Marian watched as they drove away, the keys to her old life dangling from the woman's hand. Rosa picked her up and drove her to her own house for one last night. Marian's suitcase sat by the couch, packed and ready. The bus ticket was tucked safely into her purse, alongside her new identification card and the slim booklet of travel instructions the station had mailed her. They ate dinner at Rosa's kitchen table. The conversation drifted from the practical, "Don't forget to call me when you arrive. Keep your papers in the same place," to the tender, "I'm proud of you," Rosa said as they washed dishes together. "You did something most people never manage. You chose yourself." "It shouldn't be so hard," Marian replied. "To do something that seems so simple." "Simple doesn't mean easy," Rosa said. "Especially not for women like us." The next morning, the sky was clear and pale blue as they drove to the bus station. Marian held her ticket in her hand, tracing the printed letters again and again. Harbor's Reach. The station was not busy yet. A few travelers sat scattered on benches, their bags at their feet, their faces turned toward the arrivals board. Rosa insisted on staying until the bus boarded, so they sat together near the gate, hands clasped. Marian was about to say something trivial, a last scrap of small talk, when she heard her name. She turned. Janelle and Darius were walking toward her, expressions tight, eyes sharp with a mix of anger and fear. Rosa stiffened. Marian squeezed her hand and then let go, standing to face them. "How did you know I'd be here?" she asked. "Rosa told us," Janelle blurted, then glanced at Rosa, guilt flickering. "We begged her. We said we just wanted to say goodbye. Please don't be mad at her." "I'm not mad," Marian said. "She believes in closure. I do too, as long as we're clear about what's closing." "You can't do this," Darius said, his voice low and urgent. "You can't just disappear." "What are we supposed to tell people?" "That our mom just ran off to the beach." "You can tell them whatever story helps you sleep at night," Marian replied. "I won't be there to correct you." "Be serious," he snapped. "What if something happens? What if you fall? What if you need someone? Don't we at least deserve to know where you are?" "You deserve honesty," Marian said. "You've had it. What you want is access. That's different." A boarding announcement crackled over the speakers, the tinny voice calling passengers for the route that would eventually take her to Harbor's Reach. "We can do better," Janelle said, tears spilling now. "We can visit. We can call. We can try, Mama. Isn't that worth something? Isn't it worth giving us another chance?" "I gave you dozens of chances," Marian said gently. "You spent them. All I'm doing now is stopping the credit." She reached into her bag and pulled out 2 envelopes, smaller than the ones she had given them at dinner, the paper thicker. "I wrote you letters," she said, handing one to each. "Not to change your mind. Not to change mine. Just so you'll know how I saw things. How I felt. What I hope for you. You can read them or throw them away. That's up to you. Darius weighed the envelope in his palm as if it might conceal a check. When he met Marian's eyes, and saw nothing there but calm, he looked away. When are you coming back? He asked. I'm not, Marian said. This is not a vacation. It's a move. You're choosing a town you don't know over your own family, Janelle whispered. I'm choosing a version of myself I've never met over the version that stayed here waiting, Marian replied. I'm choosing mornings where I wake up and my first thought isn't whether my children are in trouble again. The final boarding call sounded. People around them began to stand, gathering their things. Rosa hugged Marian tightly, almost lifting her off her feet despite their age. You call me, she said. Every week. I want to know what the ocean looks like. I will, Marian promised. Her voice broke for the first time that day. She stepped back and turned to her children. For a brief, aching moment, she saw them as they had been at 5 and 3, chubby hands reaching for her, faces open, unlined by disappointment or entitlement. Love, fierce and protective, flared in her chest. She honored it. Then she honored the reality that followed. I don't hate you, she said softly. I never could. But I love myself enough now not to ask for your kind of love anymore. It hurts too much. I hope you learn to love people better than you loved me. That will be my legacy if it happens. Mama, Janelle choked. Goodbye, Marian said. Take care of yourselves. Really take care of yourselves. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward the bus. She did not look back. The bus ride to Harbor's Reach lasted through the afternoon and deep into the night, miles of asphalt unfurling beneath wheels that hummed a monotonous song. Marian sat by the window, her small suitcase tucked under the seat, her purse on her lap. Outside, the city gave way to suburbs, then fields. The buildings grew shorter, then rarer. Trees thickened along the roadside. Marian watched it all as if she were watching a film about someone else's journey. Now and then, she pulled from her purse the notebook she had started on the kitchen table weeks earlier. On a fresh page she wrote, in neat, deliberate letters, Harbor's Reach, Day 0. Underneath, she listed what she had, a bank account with more money than she had ever seen with her name attached, a bus ticket, a few changes of clothes, some photographs of Marcus and her parents, a handful of small objects that held more meaning than weight. She listed what she did not have anymore, a house, a car, a constant low-grade fear of the next ring of the phone. At a stop 2 hours into the trip, a woman a little older than Marian boarded and took the seat across the aisle. She had a soft gray sweater and a tote bag that looked handmade. After a while, their eyes met and they exchanged the polite half-smile of strangers traveling alone. Headed all the way to the coast? The woman asked, her voice gentle. Yes, Marian answered. Harbor's Reach. Me too, the woman said. I live there. Best decision I ever made. Marian hesitated, then asked, What brought you there? The woman chuckled. What brings most of us old birds to new nests? A life that fit everyone but us. I was a caretaker for 30 years. My husband, then my mother. One day I realized my own life had become a waiting room. So I left. Slowly. Carefully. Terrifyingly. And now I drink my coffee on a porch that looks over the water, and some days I feel almost selfish with how happy I am. Her words settled in Marian's chest like a warm stone. How about you? The woman asked. What are you running from? I'm not running, Marian said after a moment. I'm stepping away. Towards something. I'm not even sure what it looks like yet. Just that it's mine. That's enough, the woman said. You'll figure out the rest. They talked intermittently for the rest of the ride, not baring their souls, but sharing small details. Favorite foods, the aches that came with age, the surprise of still feeling young inside despite the mirror's insistence otherwise. The companionship, even temporary, soothed some of the anxiety that twisted in Marian's stomach when night fell and the bus rumbled on through dark stretches of highway. By the time the driver announced Harbor's Reach, The sky outside the windows was turning from black to deep blue. The first hint of dawn painted the eastern edge of the horizon. Marian stepped off the bus onto a small concrete platform that smelled faintly of salt and diesel. Her lungs filled with air that tasted different, wetter, fresher, threaded with the unmistakable scent of the sea. The terminal was modest, a few rows of seats, a vending machine, a bulletin board with flyers for local events. The older woman from the bus waved and disappeared into the arms of a man waiting by a pickup truck. Marian picked up her suitcase and walked to the doors. Outside, the town unfolded in soft colors. The streets were narrow, lined with low buildings painted in pastel blues and greens and creams. Flower boxes spilled over with trailing vines. Shop signs were hand-lettered. In the distance between two buildings, she saw it, a slice of gray-blue that moved. The ocean. A cab driver in a cap with the town's logo on it approached her with a nod. "Need a ride, ma'am?" "Yes," Marian said, managing a smile. "To the Harbor View Inn, please." As they drove, she pressed her forehead lightly to the window, watching the town slide past. A bakery with chairs stacked on tables, not yet open. A bookstore with a display of paperbacks in the window. A park with benches facing the water, a few early walkers already strolling. The waves loomed larger as they approached the shoreline, the sound of them a constant hush. The Harbor View Inn was small but welcoming, its white-clabbered exterior framed by hydrangeas. The woman at the front desk greeted her by name. "Ms. Cole, we've been expecting you," and gave her a room key and a map of the town. "You picked a good time to arrive," she said, sliding a pamphlet across the counter. "The weather's starting to get warm. The water's still chilly, but it's beautiful. Breakfast is from 7 to 9. Coffee's always on in the lobby. If you need anything, you just holler." The room was simple, a bed with a white quilt, a dresser, and a small table by the window. When Marian pulled back the curtain, she gasped. There it was, unobstructed, the ocean stretching out beyond the low rooftops, its surface catching the pale early light. It was both bigger and flatter than she had imagined, an endless sheet of moving glass. She slept for a few hours, exhaustion finally claiming her. When she woke, she showered, put on clean clothes, and went downstairs for coffee. Guests came and went around her, some tourists, some the kind of people who move easily through spaces they know well. After breakfast, Marian took the map and walked. At the edge of town, the sidewalk ended at a boardwalk that hugged the curve of the shore. Wooden benches faced the water. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and insistent. The air was alive with the rhythmic crash of waves against sand. Marian stepped down onto the beach itself, the sand cool and slightly damp under her sensible shoes. She walked closer until the frothy edge of the tide rushed up and kissed her toes. She had pictured this moment so many times in the kitchen of her old house that it felt both surreal and deeply right. 70 years old, and this was her first time seeing the ocean. The thought made her want to laugh and weep at once. She sat on a bench and watched the water move. Each wave came in, rose, broke, slid back. The pattern was infinite and never exactly the same twice. She thought of the waves of her own life. Marriage, widowhood, children, emptiness. Each cresting event had seemed final at the time, but here she was, at yet another shoreline. "First day?" a voice asked. Marian turned. An older woman stood beside the bench, leaning on a cane. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, her white hair braided neatly down her back. "I suppose so," Marian said. "First day I woke up here, anyway." "Thought so," the woman said, lowering herself onto the other end of the bench. "You've got that look." "What look is that?" Marian asked, amused. "The one that says, 'I can't believe I actually did it,'" the woman replied. "Name's Gloria." "Marian," she said. "Nice to meet you." Gloria nodded toward the water. "Best therapist I ever had," she said. "Doesn't say much, but it listens." "Do a lot of people come here to start over?" Marian asked. "More than you'd think," Gloria said. Especially women. Some leave husbands who never saw them. Some leave children who only did when they needed something. Some just leave a feeling they can't quite put a name to. They all end up here on this bench at some point, staring at that big wet miracle and wondering if they're selfish or brave. Which is it? Marian asked. Gloria smiled. Why not both? Selfish is just what they call it when you stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. They talked, the way strangers sometimes do when they suspect their stories rhyme. Marian shared a little. Not everything, not yet. But enough that Gloria nodded with a knowing softness. There's a group, Gloria said as they stood to leave. We meet at the community center on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Nothing formal. We knit. We read. We talk. We listen. You should come. I'm not much of a joiner, Marian said reflexively. You are now, Gloria replied. You just don't know it yet. Marian did go, a few days later. The community center was a low building painted seafoam green, its multipurpose room filled with tables, chairs, and the gentle buzz of conversation. There were a dozen women there, ranging from early 60s to late 80s. Some wore hearing aids. Some walked with canes or walkers. All of them had the same weary brightness in their eyes, the look of people who had carried something heavy for a long time and finally set it down. They welcomed her without fuss. Someone pressed a cup of tea into her hands. Someone else shoved a ball of yarn and knitting needles in her direction with a companionable shrug. We're not here to be experts, Gloria told her. We're here to be witnesses. Marian listened as stories unspooled around her. One woman had left a son who only called when he was between rehab stints. Another had walked away from a daughter who had spent years tarnishing her name in small ways while taking big things from her. Someone had divorced at 65, scandalizing her church but saving her sanity. They spoke not with bitterness, but with a kind of weary clarity. They laughed too, big belly laughs at the absurdity of some of the situations they'd endured. When it was Marian's turn to talk, words came haltingly at first, then in a more confident flow. She watched their faces as she spoke of Janelle and Darius, of the Mother's Day empty table, of the chat screenshot, of the last dinner. She expected judgment. She found only understanding. You did what we all wish we'd had the nerve to do sooner, one woman said when she finished. My boy still calls me only when he's in trouble. I keep picking up. Maybe one day I'll stop. You give me hope that it's possible. Marian did not see herself as anyone's example. But she understood what it meant to see a path where you thought there was none. Days fell into a gentle rhythm. Mornings on her small rental's back porch, coffee mug warming her hands, watching the sky lighten over the water. Walks on the sand, collecting shells she had no real use for but liked the feel of in her palm. Afternoons at the community center or in the library, losing herself in books she had never had time to read. Slowly, she began to build a new kind of ledger. Not of debts and gifts, but of small joys. Sunrise pinker than usual today. A fisherman at the pier caught a fish so big he needed help lifting it. I tried clam chowder for the first time. Good, but too much cream. Gloria taught me a new knitting stitch. Dropped it 5 times. We laughed until we cried. She would sometimes take out the letters she had written to Janelle and Darius, her copies, tucked into a folder in her dresser, and reread them. The words no longer stung. They felt like part of a record, an archive of who she had been and what she had endured. Weeks turned into months. Marian turned 71. Her friends insisted on a small party at the community center. There was a cake with too many candles and not nearly enough for all the years she had packed herself away. They sang, "Happy Birthday," off-key. Someone put a paper crown on her head. She wore it without irony. Gloria gave her a painting she had done, a view of the ocean from the boardwalk, the colors slightly exaggerated in the way art often makes reality more itself. Marian hung it in her living room where she could see it every time she walked past. Sometimes, late at night, Marian thought about her children. Not with the obsessive ache that had once kept her awake, but with a quieter curiosity. She wondered if they had read her letters. She wondered if they had been angry, or indifferent, or shaken. She wondered if they talked about her in their private chat the way they used to, or if her absence had forced them to find other sources of comfort. She did not reach for the phone. She did not look for them online. She let the questions drift out like messages in a bottle, tossed into the sea of her mind and carried away by tides she did not control. Once, Rosa called to tell her that Janelle had visited the old neighborhood, asking questions. She had looked thinner, Rosa said. Less sure of herself. She had hinted at trouble paying some bill and then stopped, perhaps remembering there was no one left to bridge the gap for her. Do you want me to tell you if they're in real trouble? Rosa asked. The desperate kind. Marian thought for a long moment. If they're in danger physically, yes, she said. If they're just living with the consequences of their choices, let them. That's how people grow. You've grown too, Rosa said. You sound taller. I feel taller, Marian replied. One evening, as the sun slid down and painted the water in gold, Marian sat on her deck with her notebook. She opened to a fresh page and wrote, My name is Marian Cole. I am not just somebody's mother or somebody's widow. I am a woman who made it to the sea. She paused, then kept writing. I spent years believing that love meant giving until I was empty. Now I am learning that love can also mean saying no. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people is stop cushioning their falls. That my heart is not a bottomless well others can draw from without ever pouring anything back. She thought of the Mother's Day table, set in hopeful silence for people who never arrived. Then she thought of the table at the community center, cluttered with yarn and mugs and cookie crumbs, where she had arrived and been seen. I am not grateful for how my children treated me, she wrote. I will never pretend that it was a gift. But I am grateful that I finally saw it clearly enough to change. I am grateful for the anger that turned into action. I am grateful for the bus that brought me here. The waves shushed and rolled, as if in agreement. She closed the notebook and leaned back, letting the sound of the sea fill the spaces where guilt and worry used to gnaw. Tomorrow, she knew, would be ordinary. Coffee on the porch, a walk, perhaps helping Gloria with the community garden. There would be no grand epiphanies, no dramatic confrontations. Just the slow, quiet work of living. That, she realized, was the point. Her life was no longer a stage where she waited for others to enter and exit at will. It was a small, sturdy room she had furnished herself, with a door she controlled. Sometimes, starting over at 71 meant nothing more glamorous than paying your own bills and choosing your own curtains. But to Marian, it felt like freedom. As the last light faded and stars began to prick the sky, she whispered a prayer, not for her children to come back, not for the past to be rewritten, but for all the women like her, sitting at empty tables in quiet houses, wondering if it was too late. It isn't, she said softly, as if they could hear her. It isn't too late. The waves went on breaking, indifferent and eternal, and Marian, in her little house by the sea, let their rhythm lull her into a sleep empty of nightmares and full of simple, ordinary dreams. She had walked away. She had arrived. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough.